Hello and welcome to this video detailing how to log on to a SQL Server instance and starting a new query. In order to log on to SQL Server, there are a few different tools you can use. We will mostly use SQL Server Management Studio. Be sure to select the Management Studio version for your edition of SQL Server, and in our case that will be version 2012. When the SQL Server Management Studio has loaded, you will be asked to connect to a server. The server type will be set by default to Database Engine, which is what we'll leave. The server name by default will reflect the name of your computer, and then you will also select an authentication type. When connecting to local SQL Server instances, you may prefer to just type in local between parentheses, or even shorter, use the simple period. Now, both using local between parentheses or period requires that you have enabled shared memory as a protocol in SQL Server. This is enabled by default on SQL Server installations, so you should not experience a problem with this. If you have more than one installation of SQL Server on your computer, you will have named instances. Only one instance on a machine can be the default instance, which does not require you to specify the instance name. It only requires you to specify a reference to the server itself. In case of multiple instances, you will need to specify a server name and an instance name, and these will be separated by / characters. If you have, for example, installed SQL Server 2012 Express Edition, in addition to maybe another instance of SQL Server, then you would connect to the SQL Express instance using period / SQL Express. Now, in the labs, we have SQL Server 2012 Developer Edition, which is installed as a default instance, so we do not need to specify the instance name. Authentication, you have a choice there between Windows Authentication and SQL Authentication. Windows Authentication is always by far preferred, and it's the only authentication mechanism available in the computer labs. That essentially means that you will use your Windows user account to log on to the SQL Server instance. So we are now ready to connect to SQL Server. After connecting to SQL Server, you will see that the Object Explorer window is populated. It shows you the server you are connected to using the same reference you used in the server name, in my case just a period, and in addition it also shows the version and the user who is logged on to that SQL Server instance. It is possible to close the Object Explorer just like any other window. You probably do not mean to do that on purpose. The Object Explorer is going to prove very handy for several tasks, but should you close the Object Explorer accidentally, you can retrieve it by going to View, Object Explorer in the menu, or of course, as you can see, shortcut key F8 will bring the Object Explorer back to view as well. The Object Explorer has many functions. It allows you to view the features available in the database engine. Primarily, of course, it will list the installed databases, but it will also allow you, if you have the appropriate permissions, to modify security, to deal with replication, to set up always-on high availability groups, to set specific management options such as policy, and as we will see later in the course, to use integration services. For now, we will stick with the databases node, which lists all of the databases that are available to the instance you are currently logged on to. By default, several sample databases have been installed on the lab computers, including the ones you will need for your homework assignments as part of the SQL review, which would be the company database and the Riverbend database. System databases, which are the types of databases that SQL Server needs to operate properly, are listed under their own separate node. This is done to avoid executing operations on the system databases, which is generally not desirable. We will not address database snapshots. If you want to drill down into the details of a particular database, you will click on the Riverbend node in this case, and you see that all of the functions that a database can offer are listed there. The first piece is database diagrams. Then we have tables, which are of course the database objects that actually store the data. We have views, synonyms, programmability, service broker, storage, and security. We will not bother much with any of those other than tables for the review piece of this course. Under the tables node, you will see that there are two subfolders as well as a list of tables in this database. The list of tables in this database are called the user tables. In other words, those are created by the database user for purposes of relational data access and storage. It also lists the system tables if you have the appropriate permission to review that. And the system tables are those tables that SQL Server needs to actually run and manage that particular database. A new option in SQL Server 2012 is file tables, but that is beyond the scope of this discussion. You can drill down further. For example, we can use the patient table, which is in the DBO schema, and look at its columns. And together with its columns, it provides information about the data type for that column, as well as whether or not the column allows null instead of a value. We can look at the defined keys, which includes the primary key indicated by a yellow key and foreign keys indicated by a gray key. There can of course only be one yellow key in the keys node, because there can only be one primary key per table. There can be multiple foreign keys. There could be multiple yellow keys in the columns list, because a primary key could be a compound primary key, meaning it is made up of more than one column. Constraints, triggers, indexes, and statistics are also available as database and table objects. So now that we've done a quick review of logging on to SQL Server and using the Object Explorer to drill down into a particular database, we will now also see how to create a new query. The new query command is available from the toolbar and can also be invoked using the Ctrl-N shortcut key. Pressing New Query will create a new query window, and if you have a database selected in the Object Explorer when you click the New Query command, that new query will automatically be set to the context of the Riverbend database. This is visible here at the top of the screen. If you have accidentally selected the wrong database before you clicked New Query, you can change the database this query will be executing on in one of two ways. The primary way to do this is to use the drop-down list and select the proper database from this list. Alternatively, you can also use the use statement, which is technically not a SQL statement, but it is a statement that is recognized by the Management Studio. And for good order, we will use the go command after that as well. And when you execute these statements, you will see that the Riverbend database now is selected again. That ends this video on logging on to SQL Server and starting a new query.